This conversation is inspired by the Ezra and Sam Harris conversation that they had. I'm not going to talk about anything in specific, really, that they talked about there, but the nature of the conversation, because that headbutting in part is what we see a lot in our society today, and they managed to keep it civil, whereas most of the time those don't stay civil. So I felt like it was enlightening just to the nature of the conversation and what each kind of side or different sides are bringing, personalities. Something that I noticed that was missing in the conversation or was overlooked was humans need something to move toward. It needs to be positive and good. It also needs to be transcendental. And trying to move toward, when you're trying to take apart the very system that lets you move forward, you then can't move forward. So it would be like your car has a scratch on it. Oh, you point out the scratch. That's bad. It is undeniably bad. It will cause rust on your car if it's not fixed. So you trash the whole car. Even if the car is a junker, you have to add oil to it all the time because it's burning oil. I mean, you still need that car to get around and get to work. You still can't trash it even if it's in terrible condition, much less just a scratch. And I think that's something that's missed is humans do need something positive, good, and something that's greater than themselves in a respect to move forward. And taking things apart, pointing out the flaws, does not allow one in and of itself to move forward. It's also not wrong to necessarily point out the flaws, but you can't put the flaws as your point to move toward. When you're junking your car because it has a scratch, you have decided that that defect is what you're moving toward, and the car is no longer useful and it's useless. Also, something else that often comes up in identity politics is the constant cry for more diversity, that we need more equity. But they never give numbers. Is it supposed to represent a number in the population? Is it just supposed to be the number of people in any given occupation or job that want to be there? I mean, a lot of people don't want to do a lot of different types of jobs. You know, I don't want to work as a sanitation engineer. Okay. I mean, a lot of people don't. So you're going to attract a certain type of person to each job, a certain mindset, maybe even a certain physicality to some jobs. Some jobs do require a certain level of athleticism to do and strength to hold up all day, working up underneath the sun for years and doing certain jobs. And in some ways, too, they also might require a little bit of cognitive difference, because you don't want someone who's working heavy machinery that, if it gets out of control, could damage your structure, contemplating the mysteries of the universe in their head and daydreaming. Like, that sort of person isn't suited for that type of job, to watch this machine do this same function over and over. But they actually do need to watch it and kind of pay attention to it. So they can't just be off in fantasy land. And I think we see that. I think it's an important point to bring up, that I don't know that I would expect, and this is the other problem that you get with diversity, which is the problem that I want to continue on, is that if you keep looking for differences, you will always be able to find differences. So whether you split your diversity among skin color, country of origin, religion, genders, multiples, I guess, if you want to give. I mean, you can keep going down that tree forever, practically. And I'm not sure that that's useful. I'm actually almost positive that it isn't useful, and it seems to be counterproductive. Because this is the second point that I'm going to talk about, lead into. You're directly trying to combat humans' in-group, out-group preferences. I think it's good to point out that humans naturally try to form a group, an in-group. And by extension, by forming an in-group, you have an out-group as well. Even if no one's in that out-group, by forming an in-group, you're saying this is our group, and the out-group is out there somewhere, in the wilderness, so to speak, because they aren't here in the in-group. And I think we can't try to completely get rid of that. I think that's impossible, because that means then you would have no attachment to your children. you would view them as any other child, which is, I don't think, healthy. I think you should be probably more concerned with your children than all the children in the world. And it's also a bit of a lie to say that, well, now I am concerned. All children are the same as my children, which isn't true. But we do need to bring that up so that we notice that preference. And I think even by realizing that we form these tribal in-group, out-groups, it helps to soften it a little bit so it's not so hard-lined. The other thing that we don't want to get rid of this tribalism, so to speak, is because humans that work together obviously are superior to humans that work alone. So if you can manage to form a cohesive in-group of 100 people, and another person is only able to form an inclusive in-group of 2 people, who's going to be more productive and successful? The 100 that can actually pull it together, and so on and so forth. However, I would even argue, though, even just having 2 or 3 people work together is so superior to just one person working together that even those small numbers could make a difference in a whole individualistic society, so to speak. So people working together cooperatively, voluntarily, is a good thing, and we shouldn't try to put barriers in front of people trying to form in-groups. And when we're putting diversity first, you're not saying, let's work toward the good, to the positive, to the transcendental, but you're actually dividing people and saying, no, this skin color of person and this skin color of person they don't want to form an in-group, and we're going to strike those differences and try to make them even more pronounced, which I can tell you flat out is just wrong. I really don't think skin color is that big of a deterrent to forming an in-group. It really isn't. Not in my experience, at the very least. Yeah, there is, people that do dislike someone of a certain skin color initially. That can sometimes come up. But fortunately, in the United States, in most modern countries, it's a pretty small minority that's like that. And that's not the first thing I don't think that most people think about when they see someone of a skin color. The next thing I want to talk about is maternalizing public policy. And I've noticed that many policies that are put forth are of a nature that I would see a mother treat her like 6-month-old with. For example, if a child has a toy, another little child sees that and they want the toy. Well, mother will go get a toy of commensurate value, hopefully. Maybe they'll try to trade, because sometimes even getting another toy doesn't matter. It's that they have the toy, I want the toy, that sort of thing. So maybe they give them 5 minutes and they have to share the toy. They have to share the toy, right? It's not a voluntary decision. Also, evening up. So if somebody gets 5 chips to eat for snack, then we count out 5 chips for the other one. Oh, one of those is a half chip, so you try to balance it out. I mean, I've literally seen mothers count chips, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing actually for a little child, but I don't want you to think that I'm also trying to, because I know a lot of people nowadays don't have kids, or they only have one kid. They don't see necessarily a whole bunch of kids interacting all the time together with a mom. So I don't want you to think that I'm trying to exaggerate this, but this is something that comes up in actual life. And there is you do treat a 3-month-old, a 6-month-old, a year, 2 years, 3 years. You don't treat all those the same. They have different abilities and different needs. And so the problem is, though, that I'm seeing is that we're putting policy for adults at that maternal level for a little child. And I feel that it's insulting to certain groups to treat them treat them as infants, as if they're helpless and don't have really agency, which, by the way, is fine with a little child, because they do have, lack a lot of those characteristics, but not in adults. And putting them forward in public policy is actually kind of racist if you're doing it on skin color. And I'll give you an example of this is the talk of white privilege, that white people have this, which almost seems a bit magically induced, like they have this magic privilege for the grant of their skin color. But I don't know how else to describe it. So they just have this advantage, and they have pushed this advantage at the expense of other people, other skin colors, and that they are able to do this so well that even with a lot of, like, say, hard leftists like SJWs and types actively combating this, they still can't, the minorities still can't overcome this white privilege. So what you're really saying is white people are superior. You're calling it white privilege, but you might as well say white superiority, because they have dominated, for example, in this case, black people, and they have set up a structural system whereas white people benefit from it. Black people are hindered, and in fact, white people profit off the labor of black people, and that it's so pervasive that a lot of people don't even know about it. It's so well hidden. Black people have internalized some of this and don't know it. I mean, this actually is racist. I don't think white people get an automatic privilege point, that they are automatically going to do better at the expense of other people, and that there's this system in effect that does this. Certainly, just the world and the universe rewards certain behaviors better than others. And that depends on the environment to a large, to some degree. I mean, some behaviors maybe are so poor that no environment would they be good in, perhaps. But that component of that, of trying to help a minority, is really racist and offensive. And I don't think I've yet to hear an SJW or a hard left type say something about that. What do they say to that? What do they counter that with? But to move on to another point, one of the other problems that I see in the conversation that we're having is, this is related to the first point, that we need something good, positive, and transcendental to work toward. If you're going to put oppressed people at the top of your apex of your hierarchy that you're going to work toward the good, you are going to oppress people because you're putting oppression at the top. So you can't put a negative value at the top of the hierarchy because it's not positive and you can't work toward it. It's not good. So what the SJWs in this time and place, but the hard left is doing, by putting the oppressed people, and I'm not even agreeing that they're oppressed actually, but let's use their methodology. We're going to help the oppressed people. And so they are going to be at the top, and we're going to notice that oppression that's at the top, and we're going to work to eliminate that. No, you're working toward oppression. You are actually oppressing people. You're telling the minorities that they can't succeed because of white privilege, because white people are superior. You're also telling white people that they're so superior that they need to feel bad now for this, and that they need to actively work against themselves and in their own interest to help another people. And even with a significant portion of the population actually doing that, being hard left supporters, they still can't overcome it. That's how powerful and pervasive it is. Okay, the reason that you can't overcome it is because you've put oppression at the top of your little pyramid of hierarchy, and you're working toward it. That's why, using this methodology, you will actually never overcome oppression. One, because the exact methods that you're using to overcome it are making those differences greater, as we've already talked about. But also, secondly, because you can always infinitely find oppression. So if you don't find it in skin color, gender, country of origin, language, height, there's a bias against short men. Okay? Pretty well documented in the scientific literature. But, so it will be infinite and forever. You will actually never get rid of the oppression, because by putting it at the top point that you're working toward, you're causing it. Now, there is a way around this, but you can't be working toward oppression. You can put freedom at the top of your apex and work toward freedom, but you actually have to work toward freedom, which means letting people make their own choices, their own voluntary choices. That's something that we could all work toward and actually, obviously have at least in the past, although I think that's actually probably part of our problem right now. We're no longer working toward freedom. We're working toward oppression, and hence causing more oppression. And I think you can see that in the European countries, which certain situations such as Count Dankula and other comedians who have gotten in trouble around the world for making jokes. I mean, they've actually been hauled in front of court for a joke, which is pretty, I mean, you're not helping things by doing that. That doesn't make the world a better place. You're causing more oppression. You're not causing freedom. And I think that's pretty self-evident that if you're working toward freedom, that's something that we can all see. That's something that we can good. It's a positive. We can work toward that. And generally, freedom does come with responsibilities, but it is something that people can take on and will take on. Another side point that constantly gets, that people seem to not realize in these discussions, even with Sam and Ezra, like they could easily point out what they perceived were each other's biases, but they couldn't see their own biases. And by the way, I mean, that's very human. I wouldn't necessarily fault them for that. But however, being public intellectuals, I will lean on them much harder to not notice their own biases necessarily. Our reason follows our intuitions. And I don't think it's realistic that humans should necessarily be expected to know all of their biases and intuitions. Living a long life of reflection, engaging in talk with other people, even reading different thoughts in different languages, yes, that can, get you to realize something, but it's a slow process. I mean, it's kind of like working on being a better person. You can't just snap your fingers and do that, and you can't do it by yelling and shaming people and just making them feel bad because you're giving them other biases and other ramifications. It's just something as a human project that we have to each work on. I'll leave you with this last thing that I've said for years that I've noticed about people. It's odd how your reason always agrees with your point of view. Rare is the person that I have found that have reasoned themselves into something that they did not agree with. But that should actually happen. You should be like, I like this, I feel this way on this subject. Okay? And here's my good reasons for it. Okay, well, let's do a little research. Let's do the opposite side now. Let's reason on a counterpoint. Reason on the counterpoint, and then go, you know what? I agree with that one. That one's better. I know people say they do, but they really don't. Okay, most people, for the most part, do. I mean, now don't get me wrong. People can reason, and reason is valuable. Thinking, is good. Clear thinking, but most of us don't reason into something that we don't like. Now, like I said, there are small exceptions. We can be reasonable sometimes about things. Coincidentally enough, the things that we can be most reasonable about are things that we don't care about, which is kind of odd, because the things we don't care about, we don't really argue about. In your personal life, it's like, do we go to this place or this place to dinner? It's like, I like them both. I don't care. Okay. Let's go to this place or this place. No, I hate that one place. I hate it. I don't want to go there, but I want to go. And so, okay, now we've got to, right? So just knowing that doesn't help. Things that people don't care about, they're not going to argue about. And they can actually be much more rational and sober on it. But that doesn't help, because the things we care about are the things we're going to fight about. So those are the times when we need to be able to think clear-headed, I guess, most of all. And show some compassion and humility too, and a little bit of charity on the part of the person that we're talking to. This idea, which I suppose will never go away, is of the blank slate, that people are pretty much malleable, and that if they are given the correct environment, you can have a doctor, a rocket scientist, an engineer, a tech guru, a professional athlete. They just need the right environment. And anybody can compete at those levels. You can be an Olympic athlete, a billionaire. Everybody could, if the right environment was to come. And if you haven't read Pinker's book, The Blank Slate, I think it's an excellent summary of this. And it's just not so. Now, people aren't locked either 100% on the other side. It's both. People are somewhat malleable, but they're not completely malleable. And the hard left in particular, always pushes this idea that people are infinitely malleable. And I have a suspicion, I have no studies behind this yet, but I have a suspicion that this is because some people are more malleable than others. And people that are very flexible, very open, so to speak, and also conscientious and intelligent, they can do a variety of things. They were a good student, they're a good debater, good communicator, they have good interpersonal relationships, they're maybe a good writer, they do well at their job, and they're just thinking maybe they have multiple jobs, maybe they do 3 or 4 different things that are wildly different, They might even own 2 or 3 companies, and they're just like, well, everybody could probably do this, right? Because as humans, we kind of naturally project how we are on everyone else, and we think that people are like we are. And I don't think it's bad to encourage that in people, but I also think it's not realistic to expect every person to be as high functioning as one perceives oneself in all areas, right? That's not realistic. I do think probably that some people are a bit more malleable, and that they are able to probably juggle quite a few different things quicker and easier. This is probably somewhat related to IQ, but not entirely. Also openness and creativity. Someone being curious. Being curious, I've noticed, is a good way to learn a lot of different things in a lot of different weird areas, because you always are like poking around at things, just always poking, and you just learn a lot of different things in a lot of different areas. And you don't even have to be really smart to pick up these different things. Even someone probably with a modest IQ of 115 or 120 would be fine with also being curious. So I just want to mention that because this constantly comes up. And I also find it not respectful of other people that they push this worldview on everyone. Even knowing like intelligence score breakdowns doesn't mean that because you're dealing with someone that fits in one of these groups that you've analyzed, so their mean intelligence scores, that doesn't mean that the person you're talking to, you should assume anything about them. And I don't understand where this fascination comes with putting these people in these groups and then assuming things about them. No, when you're talking to a person, you don't treat them as a monolithic group of any sort. You treat them as a person, as this singular entity who is in front of you, who you're interacting with, and because they are human, they deserve that human respect, human dignity. And I will talk to you, and I'll find out what I need to from you, instead of assuming, and I wouldn't even assume infinite malleability on people. That just because you're talking to a person means they could do anything. Maybe they can't. Maybe they simply don't want to. Why do feminists expect women to have 50-50 in all jobs? Maybe women just don't want to do some jobs as a group. Okay. Well, they can pretty much do any job nowadays they want. I think, they're pretty much doing what they want to do. Some of them are actually doing what they don't want to do and aren't happy about it. But they're doing jobs, and maybe they're making a lot of money, but they aren't happy with that. Just like some men. Some men work jobs, they work really hard, they get a whole bunch of money, and they turn 40 and they go through a midlife crisis because they're not happy. Turns out making all that money, which I'm sure alleviated some problems, might have created a lot of other problems and other things they just didn't even deal with because they were so focused on that. Now, they're out there dating 18-year-olds driving a Corvette, trying to, I guess, relive that youth, go back, make up for the time that they blew, or whatever it is that causes that midlife crisis in men and women. I'm really confused by that the blank slate idea that keeps coming up, and I don't think anyone credibly that's intellectual says publicly they believe that people are blank slates anymore. But they pretty much do. They believe that they're like 90% blank slates, maybe, or 95%. Almost all of it's, malleable. Like, if we give people the right inputs, everyone will have 150 IQ. I don't think that's true. Could we do better? As humans, well, yeah, we can always do better. We can always do better in every single thing. That's the hierarchy, working toward that point. The good, the positive, though, the transcendental. Working toward that. And we will be doing that forever, more likely than not. But we're rewarded by climbing that hierarchy, working toward that point on the hill, on top of the mountain, by things getting better as we move up. There's less racism in the U.S. than there was 100 years ago, 150 years ago, right? 200 years ago, however you want to go back. There's just overall in the world there's less. Like slavery is generally, there are still countries that have slavery, but there are a lot fewer than basically all countries engaged in slavery to some degree or another, or at one point or another. And now most places recognize that's a bad thing. And even the places that engage in slavery, I don't think they actually think it's a good thing. Maybe they just think it's a good thing for them, but they don't actually think that everybody should be like this necessarily. Although I don't really know that specifically. And I think one other point of discussion that needs to be brought up, because I don't think we're taking the problem seriously enough, is of AI. Jobs have always been replaced. Jobs go, some get phased out, they aren't needed, new technologies overwrite them. Okay, that's a normal course of human events. And there have been other scares in the past where people are like, oh no, probably the people that, made horse saddles were worried they were going to be put out of business by the car. They weren't, but certainly there's less horse saddles, sold before the car. There was probably more sold before the car came along, because that was the main means of conveyance. However, the problem with AI is that it will replace jobs once it actually starts working really quickly, way faster than ever before in human history. And if it actually takes off, because as probably most of you know, computer power is like, on this exponential huge curve that once it starts getting going, it's going to take off huge. So once they actually get automated cars working, the AI for that's probably going to be a huge leap in power for AI. And after then you'll start seeing it being replaced in tons of places all over the place. There probably won't be a need for any retail worker. There may not be a need for much of a restaurant staff at all. Drivers won't need those anymore of any sort. And, in the end, I think it'll be good. The problem is that the jobs could potentially be replaced so quickly that people won't have time to move into another field. Or even if they move into another field, as soon as they get established, that then evaporates due to AI. And I don't want to be doom and gloom on this. And I'm not trying to put forth as doom and gloom. But I do think that we do need to be aware of that danger of it being replaced so rapidly, so quickly, that it could be a problem. And it's just something that we should be aware of and be thinking about in case it is. We don't want to be taken completely unawares that we have suddenly 20% of the population within a couple of years time span that just doesn't have work, because there's nothing related to what they used to do available right now. So maybe we embark on a job training, free job training, okay? And we're going to get all these people retrained. We get them retrained, and those jobs then go away because the technology is moving along so quickly. And I don't think anyone knows the answer to this. And, AI also could be exaggerated. They keep promising these self-driving cars, and they were really hyped about them. I remember a couple years ago, there's tons of news stories on them, and then it fell flat. They had exaggerated how well they were doing with the AI on the cars. They weren't doing that well, and it does appear that technology is still quite, a few years away. But 5 or 10 years or even 20 years isn't that long. Look how quickly the telephone from the telegraph days has come along, how quickly it has developed into these power computers that we carry along, these dopamine machines. So I do think that is worthwhile to bring up in discussions, just as a point of we don't know yet exactly what the effect of this will be, but it could be different than times in the past just because it's going to be so fast and potentially so pervasive in the jobs that it replaces, just so much so quickly. Just like in a boat, if you have a leak and it's a slow leak, you can you can bail it. No big deal if it's really small. Okay, not a problem. It's a bigger problem when the water is coming in, pouring in, gallons per second. You might even still be able to bail that. You might be able to get a couple people on it, working the whole time bailing it. Okay, but you had to reallocate resources, right? You had to have those people there and available. They couldn't be doing something else so essential that they couldn't do that. But if the hole is so massive, you don't even have enough people on the boat to bail it, and the boat's going down and it's going to sink in 2 minutes, well, if you knew you had that hole in that boat before you went out, that could have been really avoided altogether. So, and that's just all I want to do is just at least open the conversation so that we're aware of this and that we're not completely blindsided as a society by what's going on with that. If you have any questions, please leave them below, and I'd love any feedback, positive or negative, that you have. Thank you.